He humiliated a poor maid in front of everyone, accusing her of stealing and getting ready to throw her out of the house. But when his little daughter stepped forward and said something no one expected, the whole room fell silent. That moment changed the family's life forever. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. The mansion stood high on the coastal ridge, overlooking the city of Miami, like a marble monument to wealth. It was a place that seemed to breathe luxury and silence at once. Sunlight spilled through vast windows, glinting off polished floors so clean they reflected every shimmer of the crystal chandeliers above. The scent of lilies floated faintly in the air, mingling with the sterile aroma of expensive polish. It was a house where sound itself seemed unwelcome, where even the ticking of the golden clock in the hall was hushed, as if afraid to disturb the perfect order that ruled every inch of the estate. This was the home of Michael Bain, billionaire, investor, and man of exacting precision. He was known for his sharp suits, colder eyes, and his belief that perfection was not a goal but an obligation. In his house, nothing was ever out of place. The curtains fell in perfect symmetry. The glasses gleamed as though newly cut from crystal, and the servants moved like shadows, silent, efficient, invisible. For Michael, the house was not a home but a reflection of his empire, a stage where disorder was an insult and emotion a weakness. Among the quiet figures who kept this flawless illusion alive was Rosa Johnson, the housemaid. She was not young, perhaps in her early 40s, with calm brown eyes and hands worn from years of labor. Her uniform, neatly pressed blue fabric with a white apron, always smelled faintly of soap and lemon oil. Though she was quiet, there was a kind of dignity in the way she moved, in the way she never complained, even after hours of scrubbing marble floors or polishing the same silverware for the 100th time. To her employers, Rosa was invisible. To herself, she was simply surviving. Each morning she rose before dawn in a tiny rented house on the outskirts of the city. The walls were thin, the roof sometimes leaked, but inside there was warmth. The warmth of love she shared with her daughter, Lila. The little girl was 8 years old with bright eyes and hair tied in tight braids. She suffered from asthma, and Rosa spent most of her earnings on medicine and doctor visits. At night, when Rosa came home exhausted, Lila would sit by the window waiting, a blanket wrapped around her small frame. "Mama," she would whisper as Rosa entered, and that single word would wash away the weight of the day. Rosa would smile, stroke her daughter's cheek, and whisper back, "As long as I have you, everything is fine." In the mansion, no one knew or cared about her life beyond the walls. To them, she was part of the furniture, another piece of the house's machinery. Yet among all who lived and worked there, one person noticed her, the master's daughter, little Emma Bain. Emma was 7, pale-haired and quiet, with the solemn curiosity of a child raised in loneliness. Her mother had died years earlier, leaving behind a void the mansion could not fill. Her father, consumed by business, treated her with the same distant politeness he gave his board members. Emma's world was made of marble halls, polite smiles, and silence. But when Rosa passed through the corridors, humming softly as she cleaned, something in that voice drew Emma like a moth to light. Often, when no one was watching, Emma would follow the maid, not to spy, but to listen. She would hide behind door frames as Rosa worked, watching her wipe the dust from portraits or arrange flowers in crystal vases. Rosa sometimes noticed her and pretended not to, but then she would start to sing softly, old songs filled with warmth and memory. And Emma would stand there, eyes wide, feeling a peace she didn't understand. There were rules in this house, strict, unspoken laws of separation. Servants were not to speak unless spoken to, not to linger in rooms once their work was done, and certainly never to form attachments with the family. Yet one afternoon, when Emma's toy fell down the staircase and shattered, Rosa was the only one who knelt beside her to help. The maid's gentle hands gathered the broken porcelain pieces, and without a word, she smiled at Emma. A real human smile, not one born of duty. It was the first time in months anyone had looked at the little girl with kindness. From that day, Emma began to trust her completely. Time passed quietly, and Rosa continued to work unnoticed by most, except for Emma. The girl began finding excuses to see her, pretending to be lost in the corridors, asking for water when her nanny wasn't around, or sitting silently in the corner of the hall while Rosa dusted. Between them formed an invisible bond, delicate, unspoken, yet stronger than either of them knew. The peace of the house was about to be disrupted. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the palms, the mansion's main hall was transformed. The floors were waxed to mirror brightness, tables dressed in linen, the chandeliers polished to brilliance. Michael Bain was preparing for one of the most important evenings of his career, a grand reception for investors, politicians, and journalists. Every servant was on alert, every detail rehearsed to perfection. "Everything must be flawless," the head butler barked as he paced the hall. "No mistakes. Mr. Bain expects excellence." Rosa nodded silently, clutching her cleaning cloth. Her body ached from hours of work, yet her eyes stayed calm. She polished the brass railings until her reflection gleamed back at her. Somewhere in the shadows of the hallway, Emma watched, fascinated by the quiet endurance of the woman everyone overlooked. The day before the event, a problem arose. Rosa's neighbor, who usually watched Lila, suddenly left the city. Rosa had no choice but to take her daughter with her, promising the child she would be quiet and stay hidden. She found a small storage room near the kitchen and made a little nest there, an old chair, a book, and a soft scarf. "You'll stay here, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing Lila's hair from her face. "I'll finish my work and come get you when it's dark." Lila nodded solemnly. "Can I draw?" "Of course," Rosa smiled. "Just don't make any noise." Later that afternoon, as Rosa passed through the halls carrying buckets, Emma spotted the girl peeking out from behind a door. Curious, she approached. Their eyes met, one in a maid's uniform, the other in a bright yellow dress. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then Emma smiled and whispered, "What's your name?" "Lila," the girl replied shyly. "Do you live here?" "No. My mama cleans the house." Something like wonder flickered across Emma's face. She had never spoken to another child without a nanny or tutor hovering nearby. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a golden pencil with a small star at the end. "You can keep it," she said. "It's my favorite." Lila's eyes widened. "But it's too pretty." Emma shook her head. "Then it's perfect for you." In return, Lila folded a small crane from a page she had torn from her book and placed it in Emma's palm. "He's lucky," she said softly. "He brings good things." The two girls smiled, a silent agreement born between worlds that had no business meeting. It was the first spark of something pure in a place built on pride and distance. Outside, the mansion gleamed beneath the setting sun, ready for the grand event. Inside, Rosa continued to work, unaware that the next evening would change her life forever. As night fell, she wiped the last traces of dust from the staircase, her fingers trembling from exhaustion. Emma's laughter echoed faintly from her room upstairs, a sound so rare that even Rosa paused to listen. It was the laughter of innocence, still untouched by the cruelty of the adult world. And though she could not know it, by the time the chandeliers were lit for the following night's reception, that innocence, Emma's and her own, would soon be tested in ways neither could imagine. The walls of the silent mansion would finally hear something they had not known for years, the sound of truth breaking through fear. The next day would begin with perfection, as it always did in Michael Bain's house. But by nightfall, that perfection would shatter, and in the center of the storm, two small girls, one born to wealth, one born to struggle, would stand side by side, changing the course of every life within those golden walls. Morning came dressed in gold, spilling across the marble floors of the Bain mansion. The air buzzed with anticipation. Servants moved briskly, their faces tight with concentration. Today was the day of the reception. Every corner gleamed, every curtain hung flawlessly, and even the fountains outside had been scrubbed to perfection. The mansion stood like a palace awaiting its court. Rosa had been working since before sunrise, her hands raw from polish, her knees aching from hours spent on the floors. Yet she worked silently, steady and focused, as if each sweep of her cloth could protect her from the eyes that saw her as nothing more than part of the furniture. Upstairs, Emma watched from behind the stair railings. She was dressed in a yellow silk dress chosen by her father's assistant, a ribbon tied perfectly around her hair. She looked like a doll, beautiful, delicate, and untouched, but her eyes were alive, following every movement below. She saw Rosa move like a shadow through the hall, calm despite the chaos around her. In that moment, Emma didn't see a servant. She saw someone who belonged to the world of real things: sweat, work, and care. A world more honest than the one her father's guests inhabited. As the afternoon light faded, the mansion transformed into a scene of wealth and grandeur. The chandeliers were lit, the scent of roses and champagne filled the air, and laughter began to echo off the high ceilings. Men in tailored suits gathered around crystal glasses, discussing markets and mergers. Women in silk gowns drifted like living jewels, their laughter high and practiced. To them, this evening was another performance in the endless play of power. Rosa moved quietly between them, her uniform crisp, her steps light. She carried trays of hors d'oeuvres and glasses of wine, careful never to meet anyone's eyes for too long. Each time she passed a mirror, she barely recognized the tired woman reflected there. Her world was service, invisibility, and silence. Yet when her gaze briefly met Emma's across the hall, the little girl smiled at her, a small, defiant act of kindness in a place that valued none. The evening seemed perfect, just as Michael Bain demanded. Guests praised his taste, his success, his home. He stood near the grand piano, tall and composed, a man who controlled everything around him. But perfection is fragile, and sometimes it takes only a whisper to break it. It began with a gasp. One of the women, a striking figure in a silver gown, pressed her hand to her neck and cried out, "My pendant! My diamond pendant is gone!" Her voice sliced through the music. The pianist stopped mid-note. Conversations fell silent. The crowd turned, curiosity and suspicion sparking like static. The woman, Mrs. Harper, was known for her vanity. She had flaunted the pendant earlier that night, a golden chain with a teardrop diamond, rumored to be worth more than most people earned in a year. Now her face twisted with outrage. "It was right here," she said, trembling dramatically. "It's been stolen." The head butler rushed to her side, followed by Michael Bain himself. His expression darkened immediately. "Check everything," he ordered curtly. "No one leaves until it's found." Servants scattered, searching corners, rugs, and tables. Guests murmured among themselves, some offended, others entertained by the sudden scandal. Rosa stood frozen near the dining room archway, clutching her tray. She had just been in that area moments before, clearing glasses. When the butler's eyes landed on her, she felt the blood drain from her face. "You were near this table, weren't you?" His tone was not a question. It was an accusation wrapped in formality. Rosa nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I was cleaning, but—" "Then explain why this was found in the waste bin beside the servants' quarters," he interrupted. From his pocket, he drew a small velvet box. Inside it lay the pendant, gleaming under the light like an accusation. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Harper gasped, hand over her mouth. "I didn't—" Rosa began, but her voice failed her. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room. Cold, judgmental, certain. The butler looked at Michael, who crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "Rosa Johnson," he said slowly, his voice cutting through the silence. "You have worked here for years. I had thought you were honest. Clearly, I was mistaken." The words struck her like blows. "Sir, please, I would never—" He raised a hand, silencing her. "You are dismissed. Collect your things and leave immediately." The room remained silent except for the faint music still playing somewhere in the background. Rosa's throat burned. She wanted to speak, to scream that she was innocent, but the humiliation crushed the air from her chest. She bowed her head, clutching the hem of her apron to keep her trembling hands from betraying her despair. As she turned to leave, her eyes briefly met Emma's. The little girl stood on the stairs, her small hands gripping the railing, her face pale. Their gazes locked, a silent plea and a promise. Rosa lowered her eyes quickly and walked toward the servants' corridor, her steps slow, heavy, final. But Emma did not look away. Her young heart pounded with something unfamiliar. Anger. She remembered how Rosa had once helped her when she broke her toy, how gently she had smiled when no one else did. Rosa had never stolen anything. Emma was certain. And more than that, she had seen something earlier that night, a small moment everyone else missed. Mrs. Harper, while laughing with another woman, had unfastened her pendant and placed it in her own handbag for safekeeping. Emma had noticed because the diamond had sparkled under the light as it disappeared into the purse. At the time, she thought little of it, but now the memory burned like fire. Her father was wrong. They all were. Rosa was innocent, and Emma could not stand by and watch her suffer for something she didn't do. She took a deep breath and descended the stairs, her small shoes tapping softly on the marble. Heads turned as she crossed the hall. The murmur of gossip faded into expectant silence. Emma walked straight to her father and stood in front of him. "Daddy," she said clearly, her voice trembling but firm. "Rosa didn't take it." Michael blinked, caught off guard. "Emma, this isn't the time." "It is," she interrupted, surprising everyone. "I saw Mrs. Harper put the pendant in her purse earlier." She showed it to her friend. Gas fluttered through the room. Mrs. Harper's painted smile faltered. "What nonsense! She's a child." Michael turned toward the butler. "Check the purse." The man hesitated. "Sir, perhaps we shouldn't—" "Do it," Michael ordered. The butler, red-faced, approached Mrs. Harper, who reluctantly handed over her silver clutch. He opened it, reached inside, and froze. Slowly, he withdrew the pendant. The diamond gleamed under the chandelier, brighter than ever. For a long, breathless moment, no one spoke. Then came the whispers, low, scandalized, disbelieving. Mrs. Harper stammered something about confusion, about having forgotten she'd placed it there, but her words were drowned by the quiet shame that filled the room. Rosa stood motionless, her eyes wide, tears trembling on her lashes. The world that had condemned her only seconds ago now avoided her gaze. The butler mumbled an apology, but she barely heard him. All she could see was the small figure standing before her. Emma, her tiny shoulders squared, her face lifted with fearless honesty. The silence stretched, heavy and unbearable. Then Emma did something no one expected. Slowly she reached up, pulled off her delicate white gloves, and walked to Rosa. She picked up the cleaning cloth the maid had dropped and slipped on a pair of yellow rubber gloves lying nearby. Then, with a quiet dignity that belonged to someone far older than her years, she knelt beside Rosa and began wiping the floor where a glass of wine had spilled during the commotion. "If being a maid means helping people," she said softly, "then I'll be one too." Gasps echoed through the room. Michael felt the ground shift beneath him. His daughter, the symbol of everything pure and privileged, now knelt beside the woman he had just humiliated, cleaning his own floors. No one moved. Even Mrs. Harper stood frozen, her cheeks burning red. For the first time, Michael Bain had no words. He could only watch as Emma continued her quiet rebellion, her small hands steady, her chin lifted proudly. Rosa's tears finally fell. She sank to her knees beside the child, her voice barely a whisper. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't." But Emma shook her head. "I want to." The moment stretched endlessly. The music had stopped, the air still as glass, and in that silence something inside Michael cracked. For the first time in years, he saw the truth. Not in boardrooms or contracts, but in the eyes of a 7-year-old girl who had dared to stand up for what was right. When Rosa finally rose, Emma slipped her tiny hand into hers. Together, they walked past the stunned guests, past the glittering chandeliers and the lifeless stairs, toward the grand staircase. The sound of their steps echoed softly, a rhythm that carried more weight than any applause or fortune. That night, long after the guests had gone and the house had grown quiet again, Michael sat alone in his study. The echoes of his daughter's words lingered in his mind, haunting and humbling. Somewhere deep inside, beneath layers of pride and order, something began to stir, something that felt dangerously close to shame and even closer to change. The night after the scandal was silent, unnaturally so. The guests had long departed, leaving behind the faint perfume of their presence and the broken rhythm of a house that had lost its composure. The chandeliers still burned low, their light flickering on the polished floors that now reflected a very different kind of evening. In one corner of the vast hall, the traces of spilled wine still glistened, half cleaned by two small hands that had done more to cleanse the room than all the servants before them. Upstairs, the curtains swayed slightly from the open balcony doors, and beyond them, the dark sea whispered against the distant shore. Michael Bain sat alone in his study. The smell of whiskey lingered beside him, untouched in a glass. He leaned back in the leather chair, one hand covering his eyes. The scene kept replaying in his mind. The crowd's faces, the gasps, the way his daughter had stepped forward, small yet unshakable, speaking the truth that he, a man of power, had been too blind to see. He could still see her in those yellow gloves, kneeling beside the maid he had just humiliated. The image cut through the armor of pride he had built over the years, leaving behind something raw and uneasy. He remembered Rosa's face as well, the mixture of fear and dignity, the disbelief when the truth emerged. He had not apologized. He couldn't. Not then. The words refused to come. He had dismissed her like one dismisses an inconvenience, and his daughter had undone him with a single act of courage. It should have angered him, yet it didn't. What filled him instead was a kind of silence that had nothing to do with the stillness of the house. It was the silence that comes when a man realizes that everything he thought he understood about worth and respect had been built on sand. Downstairs, Rosa sat in the servants' quarters, her folded apron still damp from the evening's chaos. The other maids had tried to comfort her, but she had shaken her head, retreating to her small cot. Her hands trembled as she tried to stitch a torn hem, but she couldn't focus. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the moment Emma had stepped forward, the little girl's voice cutting through the room like light through darkness. She had never imagined that someone like Emma, someone born into silk and silver, could risk her comfort for someone like her. It wasn't just gratitude Rosa felt. It was something deeper, a quiet awe that a child had done what adults could not. The next morning dawned pale and uneasy. Rosa came to the kitchen early, as she always did, expecting to find her dismissal letter. Instead, the staff avoided her gaze, murmuring softly among themselves. The butler, who had accused her so confidently the night before, could not meet her eyes. When she asked quietly if she should collect her pay, he only muttered, "Mr. Bain will call for you." Her heart sank. She had no strength left for confrontation. But when Michael finally appeared, it was not in anger. He stood in the doorway, silent for a moment, then said simply, "In my office." His tone carried none of the sharpness of the night before. It was softer, almost hesitant. Rosa followed, her heart pounding, her hands clasped tightly together. The office was bright with morning light, the air filled with the scent of the sea and leather. Michael turned toward her slowly, and for a long while he didn't speak. He looked older than he had the day before. Finally he said, "I owe you an apology." Rosa blinked, not trusting her ears. "I misjudged you," he continued. "I let my pride and the words of others blind me. What happened last night was inexcusable." She shook her head quickly. "Sir, you don't need to." "I do," he interrupted, his voice low but firm. "You were wronged in my home. You were humiliated, and my daughter was the only one with enough courage to tell the truth." The silence that followed felt like a long exhale. Rosa lowered her eyes. "Your daughter has a kind heart, sir. Kinder than most grown people." He nodded faintly, half smiling despite himself. "Yes. She reminded me of her mother," he said almost to himself. Then, as though remembering why she was there, he added, "You may take a few days off. You will continue working here when you're ready." Rosa hesitated, unsure how to respond. Gratitude and confusion tangled inside her. "Thank you," she murmured at last. "I only wish to work in peace." When she left the room, Michael stood by the window staring out at the waves. His reflection in the glass seemed distant, like a stranger's. "What have I become?" he whispered. He thought of how easily he had condemned an innocent woman, how quickly he had believed the worst because it was convenient. And then he thought of Emma, small, fearless, pure, standing like a mirror held up to his soul. Later that day, the sound of laughter drifted through the courtyard. Michael stepped outside and saw Emma sitting on the stone steps near the garden, her yellow dress now smudged with dirt. Beside her sat Lila, Rosa's daughter, holding a small paper crane in her hands. They were talking softly, their heads bent close, the way only children do when the world around them ceases to exist. Michael watched them for a while before approaching. "Emma," he called gently. She looked up, startled, then smiled. "Yes, Daddy." "What are you two doing?" "Playing," she said simply. "Lila showed me how to make these birds." She held up her own clumsy paper shape. "Mine's not as good as hers." Lila giggled shyly. "It's perfect," she said. Michael studied the two girls, so different in background, yet bound by something far more real than wealth. Kindness. He turned to Lila. "Your mother is a good woman," he said quietly. "You must be proud of her." The little girl nodded solemnly. "She works very hard. She says good people never give up, even when no one believes them." Emma looked up at her father, a question in her eyes. "Daddy, you believe her now, don't you?" Michael crouched down, his expression softening. "Yes, sweetheart," he said. "I do." The simplicity of the answer seemed to satisfy her. She turned back to Lila, showing her how to fold the wings. The two girls laughed again, and Michael felt something stir in his chest, a warmth he had forgotten, a memory of how love once felt before he buried it under ambition. That evening, he found himself walking through the servants' corridor, something he hadn't done in years. The walls were narrow, the floors worn, the smell of soap and old wood filling the air. Rosa was there, hanging linens to dry. When she saw him, she froze, unsure if she should bow or speak. "I wanted to tell you," he began. "Emma hasn't stopped talking about you and your daughter. She admires you." Rosa smiled faintly, her hands still busy with the sheets. "She's a special child. You must be very proud." "I am," he said, "but I'm prouder of what she taught me." She glanced at him curiously. "And what's that?" "I don't know. That decency isn't a luxury," he said after a pause. "It's a duty." For the first time, she saw something in his face that hadn't been there before. Humility. A man who had spent his life above others was finally beginning to see the ground beneath him. In the days that followed, things in the mansion began to change subtly. Michael's voice softened when speaking to the staff. Orders turned into requests, and gratitude, once absent, began to appear in small gestures. Emma and Lila became inseparable. They played in the gardens, read books in the library, and filled the halls with a laughter that had been missing for far too long. Rosa continued her work, but now she walked with her head held a little higher. Yet beneath all the small changes, something deeper was taking root. Michael Bain, the man who had once thought perfection was measured by the shine of marble, began to understand that true order came not from control, but from compassion. And though he could not erase the night of his failure, he could build something new from its ashes. Late one evening, as the sun set behind the ocean and the mansion glowed with the soft amber of dusk, Michael stood on the balcony, watching the girls chase each other across the lawn. Rosa sat nearby, mending one of Emma's dresses that had torn during their play. For the first time in years, the house no longer felt like a monument. It felt alive. "Mr. Bain," Rosa said softly, handing him the mended dress. "Thank you for believing me." He took it, his eyes meeting hers. "It was Emma who taught me how." As the last light faded from the sky, the house once again fell into silence. But this time, it was not the cold silence of wealth. It was the quiet of peace, the kind that follows after truth has been spoken and hearts have begun to heal. And in that quiet, the sound of two children's laughter carried like a hymn, echoing through every empty corridor, promising that the world for once was changing for the better. The days following the scandal drifted quietly, yet the air within the Bain mansion was not the same. It was as if something intangible had shifted, like a heavy curtain had been drawn aside, letting sunlight into corners that had long been dim. The servants no longer moved with the same tension as before, though whispers still followed Rosa wherever she went. Some murmured in awe at her vindication. Others simply couldn't believe that such a thing had happened, that the master of the house had been wrong. Yet in the center of all that quiet change was the one person who seemed most unsettled by it, Michael Bain himself. Every morning as he passed through the halls on his way to the study, he would pause, Not for long, but long enough to take in the sight of the servants at work. He noticed their tired eyes, their stiff hands, the way they lowered their heads when he walked by. They had always done that, of course, but now it struck him differently. It was not respect. It was fear. And the realization stung him. For years he had prided himself on the perfection of his home, but now he saw that the silence that filled it had never been peace. It had been submission. That night still haunted him. The sight of Rosa standing alone in front of his guests, humiliated, and his daughter's small voice cutting through the arrogance of the room. He had spent his life believing that order came from control, but Emma's courage had shattered that illusion. The more he thought of it, the more he felt that he owed not only Rosa an apology, but something greater, a change he could not yet define. One morning while the sun was still low and the house was stirring awake, he asked for his car and drove into the old part of the city. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. The chauffeur stopped in front of a row of small houses, their paint fading, their porches sagging. It was there that Rosa lived. Michael stepped out of the car, feeling strangely out of place in his tailored suit. Children played on the street, and one of them, a girl with tight braids, looked up curiously at him. Lila. She recognized him immediately but said nothing. She was sitting on the steps, her thin fingers folding another paper bird. The wind caught it, and it fluttered from her hand into the dusty street. Michael picked it up carefully and handed it back. "You're very good at this," he said quietly. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her voice polite but cautious. "Is your mother home?" "She's inside," the girl said, standing up and knocking on the door. "Mama, it's the man from the big house." Rosa appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw him, her expression froze. Not from fear, but from disbelief. "Mr. Bain," she said softly, "I didn't expect—" "I know," he interrupted, his tone gentler than she had ever heard it. "May I come in for a moment?" She stepped aside, unsure what else to do. The house was small but clean, filled with the faint scent of bread and lavender. There were drawings pinned to the wall, most of them of birds and flowers. Lila's work, he guessed. Michael stood awkwardly in the room, a giant among fragile things. "I wanted to see where you live," he said finally. "After everything that happened, I realized I never knew anything about the people who work for me." Rosa's brow furrowed slightly. "We don't expect you to, sir." "Maybe that's the problem," he said. "Maybe I should have." There was a pause. The silence between them was not cold, only heavy with unspoken understanding. Rosa motioned for him to sit, but he shook his head. "I didn't come to talk about work. I came to tell you that I'm sorry, not just for accusing you, but for everything that made it possible, for the way I've run my house, for the way I've treated people as though they were less." Her lips parted, but she said nothing. She had never expected an apology from him, let alone one that sounded sincere. "Your daughter," he continued, glancing toward the open door where Lila stood. "She's strong. You should be proud." Rosa smiled faintly. "She's all I have. Everything I do is for her." He nodded, looking around the room again. "I see that, and I'd like to help if you'll allow me." "Help? I'd like you to return to the mansion," he said, "but not as a maid. I want you to manage the household staff, to make sure things are run properly, fairly. I'll increase your pay." "You deserve that much." Rosa hesitated. "Mr. Bain, that's too much. I'm just—" "No," he interrupted. "You're not just anything. You're the reason my daughter still believes there's good in this house. I need people like you there. My family does." Her eyes glistened, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Finally she said, "If you truly mean that, then I'll accept. But only if I can keep being who I am. I won't pretend to be someone else." "I wouldn't ask you to," he said simply. When he left, the morning light had grown stronger. As he walked to his car, he glanced back to see Lila waving from the doorway. She held up a new paper crane, this one bright yellow, and said, "This one's for Emma." He smiled. "I'll make sure she gets it." Back at the mansion, the change began quietly. Rosa returned to her duties, though her role was now different. The staff, at first hesitant, soon found her firm but fair. She treated everyone with the respect she had once been denied. Under her watch, the household became something new, less mechanical, more human. Even Michael found himself listening more, speaking less. The echo of his daughter's voice lingered in every decision he made. Emma and Lila became inseparable. They played together in the gardens, their laughter filling the air like music. Sometimes they sat under the willow tree, making paper birds that fluttered across the lawn in the afternoon breeze. Rosa would watch from the terrace, her heart full, while Michael often stood nearby, pretending to read the newspaper, though his eyes always drifted toward the two girls. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the sea, he joined them. Emma ran to him, holding a small folded bird. "Look, Daddy, Lila taught me how to make them fly." She tossed it into the air, and the breeze caught it, carrying it upward before it landed gently at his feet. He picked it up, smiling. "It's perfect." Lila giggled. "It's not perfect," she said. "Mine's better." Michael laughed softly, a sound that surprised even him. It had been years since laughter had come easily. He looked at Rosa, who was standing a few steps away. "You've done something I couldn't," he said quietly. "You brought joy back into this house." Rosa shook her head. "No, sir. That was your daughter. Children see what we forget, what matters most." He nodded, his gaze turning toward Emma. "Then perhaps she's the one teaching both of us." As twilight deepened, the house glowed from within, its lights warm instead of cold. For the first time in years, the air felt alive, not with perfection, but with peace. The servants moved without fear. The laughter of children drifted through open windows. The mansion that had once stood as a fortress of pride now began to breathe again, as though its walls themselves were learning the meaning of compassion. Later that night, Michael stood alone in the hallway, listening to the soft hum of distant voices. Rosa speaking to her daughter, Emma giggling from her room. He felt something unfamiliar swelling in his chest. Not pride, not relief, but gratitude. He realized that in trying to teach his daughter the world, he had been the one who learned from her instead. The next morning, when the house awoke to the first light of dawn, it was not the clang of footsteps or the sharp orders of the staff that broke the silence. It was the faint, unguarded sound of a man humming to himself as he walked down the hall, a sound no one in the mansion had ever heard before. And for the first time since it was built, the Bain estate was no longer just a monument to success. It was a home. Weeks turned into months, and the mansion by the sea began to change in ways no one had imagined. It was not the marble floors or the glittering chandeliers that altered, but the air itself. The coldness that once filled every corridor had faded, replaced by something warmer, softer, alive. Even the servants felt it, though few spoke of it aloud. The echo of harsh commands was gone. In its place came the rhythm of calm footsteps, polite words, quiet laughter. It was as if the walls themselves had begun to breathe again. Rosa had settled into her new role with grace. She still wore her uniform, though now it carried authority instead of servitude. The staff respected her, not out of fear, but admiration. She worked as hard as she always had, leading by example, never raising her voice, yet commanding attention with her steadiness. In her heart, she still carried humility, but no longer shame. Every morning she arrived with Lila, who waited for her lessons or played in the garden with Emma. The two girls had become inseparable. They shared everything, their drawings, their laughter, their secrets whispered beneath the willows that bordered the southern lawn. Michael often found them there after his long meetings, their heads bent close together over a sketchbook or a small tower of paper cranes. Sometimes he would stand at a distance, just watching. The sight always stirred something deep within him, a mix of wonder and regret, the quiet recognition of how much life he had missed while chasing perfection. He would think of the man he had been not long ago, proud, impatient, untouched by empathy, and feel a small, unfamiliar ache of remorse. Yet that pain oddly comforted him. It meant he had changed. One afternoon, as the sky burned with the colors of sunset, Michael found Rosa sitting on the terrace, mending a small tear in Emma's dress. The light caught her face, outlining her in gold. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure how to address her. There had once been a time when he would have simply issued orders, but now he approached her as an equal. She tears something new every week, he said, nodding toward the fabric. Rosa smiled faintly without looking up. That's what children do when they play without fear. He folded his arms, leaning against the railing. I suppose that's a good sign. It's the best sign, she replied softly. It means she feels free here. Michael was silent for a moment. The sea below shimmered with the last light of day. I used to think freedom came from control, he admitted. Now I see it's the opposite. You can't control happiness, only destroy it. Rosa glanced up, her expression thoughtful. We all learn that, one way or another. He looked at her, studying the lines of her face, the calm strength there. You've taught me more than anyone ever has, he said quietly, and I doubt you even meant to. Rosa lowered her gaze, her hands still working the needle through the cloth. Sometimes lessons come when we least expect them, Mr. Bain. Michael, he corrected gently. Please, call me Michael. She hesitated, then nodded, though the word didn't quite come out. But he smiled anyway, understanding her silence. In the garden below, Emma's laughter rang out, light and unrestrained. She was chasing Lila, her golden hair streaming behind her like sunlight. The girls circled the fountain, giggling, their small feet kicking up the scent of freshly cut grass. Rosa paused in her sewing, watching them with affection. They remind me that children don't see walls between people, she said softly. They just see hearts. That's something I forgot long ago, Michael murmured. Emma reminded me. Suram. She reminded both of us, Rosa said, her smile tender now. As twilight deepened, the lamps of the terrace flickered to life, casting soft halos over them. Michael looked toward the horizon, where the last trace of daylight dissolved into violet shadows. When my wife passed away, he said quietly, I built this house to keep everything in order, to keep the pain out. I thought if everything looked perfect, maybe it would hurt less. Rosa listened without interrupting. But I was wrong, he continued. All I did was build a cage, for myself, for Emma, for everyone under this roof. It took a child's voice to break it open. Rosa's needle paused. It's never too late to start again, she said. You gave your daughter a home where she can laugh. That's more than most people ever do. He nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. And you gave me back my soul. She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw not the cold employer who had once ruled the house like a king, but a man trying to be better. There was no pity in her eyes, only quiet respect. We both changed, she said softly. Perhaps that's what was meant to happen. That evening, as the stars emerged above the sea, the house filled with new sounds. The servants sang softly as they worked. The clatter of dishes was no longer rushed or fearful, but easy, rhythmic. The great mansion, which once felt like a monument to solitude, now seemed to hum with quiet life. Later, Emma came running in from the garden, cheeks flushed, her hands full of folded cranes. Daddy, look what we made, she cried, scattering them over his desk. Paper birds drifted down like snowflakes, landing on his papers, his shoulders, his lap. Lila followed, laughing breathlessly. We made 100, Michael laughed, a deep, unguarded sound. 100, you say? Then this house will never be silent again. He picked one up, its wings slightly bent, and set it on the desk. You know, he said to Emma, these are messengers of peace. Emma's eyes lit up. Then they'll keep us safe. Rosa entered quietly, holding a tray of tea. She stopped at the sight of the girl's handiwork, dozens of delicate cranes covering the room. It looks like spring found its way inside, she said with a smile. Michael looked at her. No, Rosa, you brought it. For a while they all stood there, man, woman, and children, surrounded by a quiet beauty that could never have been bought or ordered. It was built from forgiveness, from courage, from the small hands of two little girls who had bridged worlds that adults thought could never touch. That night, when the girls were asleep and the lights were dim, Michael stood by the window of his study. The moon shone silver over the sea, and the reflection danced across the marble floors. Rosa passed in the hallway carrying a blanket for Lila, her shadow crossing his door like a soft reminder that life had changed forever. He closed his eyes, listening. The house was no longer silent, not in the old oppressive way. It was alive with the breathing of those within it, with the distant sound of waves, and somewhere, faint but clear, the laughter of his daughter echoing down the hall. For the first time in years, Michael Bain felt peace, not the brittle peace of perfection, but the kind that comes when one stops pretending to be untouchable. He looked once more toward the children's room, where two small figures slept side by side, and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the ocean wind carried the scent of salt and jasmine through the open windows. The paper cranes stirred on his desk, their wings rustling softly in the breeze as though alive. And in that moment, in the great house that had once been built for silence, life itself whispered back, gentle, forgiving, eternal. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because even more powerful stories are coming your way. Watch the next video right now. You won't believe what happens next. And if you felt something while watching, share this video with friends and family. Someone out there needs this reminder today.